I'm glad to be here to present some things I've been thinking about. Some of the things I'm going to say today I have a degree of confidence in. Some of them I'm kind of speculating. So I'm kind of like casting a long line out, and hopefully on those parts of what I want to say, this is going to be a kind of general thought experiment. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a teacher. I've taught history for a long time, and so when you reach my age, you begin to think like, have I wasted my life? What am I actually doing, and so on. And of course, students ask this too. Right? Yes. So I have tried to think a little bit about what. Not so much about the meaning of history, but the meaning of historians. Like, what are historians actually doing? When we pick up a history book and we read about, World War II or, a famous president or whatever, what are historians actually doing, whether or not they fully recognize it? So I would say probably many, perhaps most, what do they think they're doing? They think they're telling you what happened. They think maybe they're telling you why a thing happened, right? Why did World War II happen? Well, there was this and there was that and so on. Some of them have a more perhaps modest goal. They think they're just telling you this is what the French Revolution was, right? I'm kind of taking the French Revolution and I'm showing it to you, this is what it is. Now, this is sometimes part of what historians are doing, but I don't think that's what they're actually deep down really doing. What are they actually doing, again, even if they're not aware of this, is, again, even if they don't mean to, they are telling you the meaning of what happened. They're telling you how we should experience what happened. If something happened in the past, whatever, World War II, presidency of George Washington, I mean, it can be interesting, perhaps, but if it has no connection to us now, then who cares? What's the point? It doesn't, if we're isolated from it, then it doesn't really matter. So, a historian is actually kind of telling you how we should experience that event right here and now. Again, many of them, I don't think that that's what they're doing. But I say, here's one of my confident declarations, I say it is. I say it is. Now, in some ways, we are all historians, in some ways, right? This is through memory, right? You have your experiences. We take those experiences and we interpret them, right? Now, to give our experience meaning, we have to emphasize some things over other things, right? We might not be able to, we might need some distance from the event, right, to see what's really important. Now, we do this in a highly personal way, right? In a way that's probably, my experience may not be accessible, to Elijah, or certain memories I have. Elijah wasn't there or whatever, and he didn't see what I saw anyway. So it'd be very hard to translate, right? But what an historian tries to do is he takes, we might say, an event that lots and lots of people experience, and to try and interpret it and give it meaning and proper emphasis in a general way so that it's accessible to everybody, right? So that even an event that, of course, I didn't experience World War II, right? But if I read about it, the historian has to make it relevant to me. So what we do in miniature, historian has to do in a grand way. to do this, right, to do this, historians have to deal with the meaning of time and what effect time has upon us, right? So, right, what is time? I'm not going to try and answer that question. I can't even begin to try and answer that question. What is time? But we know that we experience time. We know we experience time. So I'm going to assert time, in a way, works upon us as we work upon it, right? Time works upon us as we work upon it. But how does it do that? And more specifically, for my purposes here, how do historians think it does that, right? How do historians think this happens? So, what I want to do is I want to go through 3 or 4 or 5, maybe, basic schools of thought as to when historians write, right? When you pick up a history book. Hopefully, this can be of use to you as you think about, okay, what does this historian think time is about? What effect is time having on, what does he think, what effect does he think time has upon people? That's, I guess, what I want to say. What effect does he think time has upon people? All right, first view. The historian that basically thinks that time is static and meaningless. And here with my illustration, here's what I meant to convey, right? Well, surely you can all tell. You don't even need an explanation, right? Well, okay. Here's what I meant. So you have events that happen, right? And they go in some kind of pattern or order that doesn't have a lot of particular cohesion to it. But there are things that happen and things that are noted by the historian. But, with those 2 solid lines on the side, the historian makes no attempt, either makes no attempt or does not believe that we have anything actually to do with whatever that is. We are sealed off from it, and hence, time is not fluid, but fixed, and whatever they experienced can have no meaning for us. Now, you would say no one actually does this, right? No one would be an historian who would actually do this or believe this thing. And maybe not consciously, but the way they write, this, in my view, is the meaning that they convey. The archetype of this kind of historian is what I would call the British professional, circa, turn of the 20th century. And now, what I will say is there is a mask of humility to this approach, and perhaps some genuine humility. Because they would dare not, step outside of their perceived lane. I guess, imagine a mechanic. If a mechanic thought like this kind of historian, you have a problem with your car, whatever. You take your car in to the mechanic. And you say, and you ask him, what's wrong with the car? And he tells you, X is wrong with the car. And you say, what should I do? Should we fix the car? Should we take, should I do this kind of thing to fix it or that kind of thing to fix it? Or maybe it's not worth fixing, or maybe I don't need to fix it now. And what do you do? And he would say, oh, hold on. That's not my field. That's not my field. I'm here to tell you what a thing is, right? I'm here to tell you what a thing is. I'm here to tell you that the radiator is leaking or whatever. But I would never want to intrude. I'm not an economist. I'm not, I don't know your personal checkbook. I don't know your finances. I'm not, whatever. I'm not any one of these things. So I'm not going to say, I'm not going to say what this means that your radiator is broken, right? I'm not going to say what it means. I'm just going to tell you what it is. Now, if you were a customer, again, you might appreciate some of the humility there, and you might appreciate not being browbeaten or oversold something, right? But you'd probably be frustrated. You'd probably be frustrated. No, wait a second. Like, I don't know. Like, what am I supposed to do? But he won't tell you. This is this particular kind of historian. The historian, I guess we would say, is as archaeologist. I found a thing, here is the thing. But does this thing mean something? Oh, not for me to say. Not for me to say. And so what this means is that you have no connection to it. You have no access to it. And there's no meaning behind it. So I just put a couple of examples here. A guy named G.L. Cheeseman, great name, fantastic name, wrote a famous small book on the Roman Empire called the Auxiliary Troops of the Roman Empire, right? And it's a great reference book, but it's got all kinds of interesting details, and yet, what does this mean for the Roman army? Not for him to say. What does this mean for the Roman Empire? Not for him to say. What does it mean for empire management? Not for him to say. Nothing, 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 nothing. And it just left like, what am I doing? Why am I here? Dan Jones is a modern guy. Now, I put a question mark here. I tried to read one of his books, a big, thick book on the Plantagenet kings of England, like Henry I, Henry II, and so on. And I just, I couldn't get any, obviously, lots of very specific knowledge. But as to what it meant or what its connection was to us, no. I thought, what's going on? I flipped to the end, like the conclusion, and it was like, so we can see that many things happened during this time, right? And that there was a king, and then there was a war, and then there was this and that, and so we see that things happened. When you encounter a historian like this, they may have very key specific insights, but they won't tell you, right? You won't feel a connection to them because they're not telling you what things mean, they're not relating it to you, and they're not helping you experience it or take that experience into your own life. So, essentially, they believe that time is meaningless. The benighted optimist, the so-called Whig school of history. The Whig school, right, look, sure, in some ways, things have gotten better, right, from the past until now, right? But the benighted optimist tends to think that, well, time is a vehicle, right? Time is a vehicle that pushes us forward into bigger, bolder, brighter days, right? Time advances us. Now, usually the Whig school of thought, time advances us technologically, time advances us politically. And of course, the Whig school is not just so much about the future, but also about affirming the present. Right? The Whig school will basically think that time is a train that you've got to catch. You've heard you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, right? We've heard this before. Such a person is of this school, whether they realize it or not. They're basically saying, hey, we have to move forward because time is pushing us and making us better. Time makes us better, right? If you hear a debate about a particular, well, should we do X? And the answer is, well, it's 2026, right? Obviously, what's that? It's the current year. Obviously, and we are in fact doing X, So, right, whether it's a technology thing or a moral question, for example, I heard this, I mean, probably we remember this from about 10 years ago when, homosexual, quote unquote, marriage was being discussed. Well, it's 2015, right? Obviously, here we are, and we are the byproduct of time, and if here we are, then this must be right. This must be good, right? Time is a train you want to catch. You don't want to be on the wrong side of it. Most historians are not Whig historians. Most are not. But you hear this a lot in public discourse. And so, be aware, though, what they're really saying is time makes us better. Time makes us better. The flip side of this, I'm going to skip that, is the grumpy old man, right? Time makes us worse, right? Back in my day, we did X, and we were strong and healthy and good back then, and you guys are soft. By the way, I never realized until I turned about 35 or so and was teaching and had my own kids, how much fun that is to say. Oh, my right? Oh, back in my day, this and that and the other, right? Oh, it's so fun, completely irresistible. This idea that no, time makes things, in fact, worse. It brings us from a previous era of goodness, right, to a current era where things, through current time, where things are worse. This has roots, this idea has its roots in a lot of pagan mythologies, where you see this kind of previous golden age, this gold, silver, bronze, iron age kind of descent. You see it, right? You could argue you see this in Genesis, right? Where you have, right, everything is great up on top of the mountain, and then you come down the mountain and things get worse and people live less and there's more violence and there's, right? So, sure, this definitely has roots, not only mythology, but also in Scripture. The grumpy old man, though. Now, but part of the reason why, so yes, it has roots in reality, but part of the reason why I think this is so attractive to historians is that most historians are old men who are reflecting on decay, and so they write that way. The grumpy old man sees time as a bringer of decay and fragmentation. Time as a bringer of decay and fragmentation. I put Thucydides up here, question mark by him. He wrote a very famous work about the Peloponnesian War in the 400s BC. He was writing about a fairly brutal war, so maybe it's natural that he would, see, we're not what we once were. And he wrote about a limited scope of time. So maybe it's not fair to put him in that school, but that's certainly the impression I got. Ammianus Marcellinus, late Roman antiquity, a Roman general, wrote about the Roman army, and he's constantly kind of saying, we're having this problem, back in the day, now we're dealing with all these problems. My personal favorite, though, is number 3, not as well known, but Sallust, the Roman historian Sallust. So there are a couple of different applications of this time as decay and fragmentation school. There is, I think, a positive spin on this, or a positive application of how to do this, of this approach. But there's also a destructive application, and Sallust, I think, is the best example I know of this potentially destructive application of this idea. So Sallust, like a lot of people, right? Well, first of all, I'll give you the context. Sallust wrote 2 books. He wrote a book called the Jugurthine War, about Rome's war with a North African king named Jugurtha. And then he wrote a book called The Catiline Conspiracy about around 63 BC in the Roman Republic, where a very wealthy, blue blood Roman tried to overthrow the government. And his name was Catiline. Sallust believed, right, in this kind of decay sort of thing. His example of a better past. This is an interesting story. I'll share it as, not because, well, I'll share it because it's interesting. How does Sallust begin the Jugurthine War? He talks about, well, back in the day, people were honorable and so on. He talks about this conflict between Carthage and Numidia. Now, these are both places in North Africa. So North Africa, desert, Sahara. So you can imagine keeping a border between two nations in the desert is tricky, right? So there are all kinds of conflicts. Rather than have a big war, they decided to settle it without war. So they each got 2 guys. The Numidians got 2 guys. The Carthaginians got 2 guys. They had enough people say, all right, we're going to have this road here, and you guys will start over here, and an equidistant from the other people, you'll start from there, and when we say go, right, basically, you'll start walking towards each other, and wherever you meet on the road, that's going to be the new border. So, it happened, right, they set it up, they say go, they start walking, or running, or whatever they did. The Numidians experienced, like there was a bad sandstorm, etc. They lost the road, they got delayed. So naturally, the Carthaginians, right, when they finally met them on the road, it was way, they were really happy. They had gone several miles farther than they thought they would get. So the Numidians said, oh, come on, please, we can't go back home after, with this being the border. We'll be disgraced and shamed forever. Can't be. Please, the Carthaginians were like, hey, fair is fair. This is what happened. Sorry about the sandstorm and all, but tough luck for you. And the Numidians said, well, I agree. You're right. I mean, fair is fair. And so we're asking a favor. We're asking, to be gracious to us and so forth. Just a couple miles, just a little bit, so we can go home with our heads held up, at least, a little bit high. And they said, well, okay, I'll tell you what. Why don't we walk a couple miles back here and we'll put the border stone back a little bit in our direction. On one condition. On the condition that at that spot, you dig a big hole, get in it, and we bury you alive there. That's where we'll put the marker. And the Numidians said, sounds good, let's do it. And so they did. And so the marker was put there. And Sallust says, boy, you got to hand it to those Numidians. Pretty courageous guys, pretty honorable guys, which is perhaps not a surprise. But then the thing that is actually surprising is he said, and those Carthaginians too. I mean, tip your hat to them, too. They didn't have to move the border, but they did. So, good for them. Well done. And when you read stories like that, then you're like, wait a second. The ancient world, the difference between the pagan world and the Christian world, it's a profound difference. It's a profound difference. Okay. So, Sallust uses that as like, back in the day, people were honorable and had integrity. Of course, today we don't. Now, what is interesting about both of his accounts is how he kind of shows different perspectives. So in the Jugurthine War, there are parts, you can read the text saying, well, he really thinks Jugurtha's the honorable one. No. He really thinks Marius, this Roman consul, is the honorable one. No. He really thinks Sulla, this Roman praetor, is the honorable one. And you can see, that's interesting. Different perspectives, different windows. In the Catiline Conspiracy, you can read it thinking, no, Cicero, he's the hero. He stopped Catiline. You can read it thinking, no, Caesar, that is Julius Caesar, maybe he's the hero because Cicero, to accomplish this, had to do some extra constitutional, extra legal things. And Caesar here is standing up for, the integrity of the law and custom and so on. And then you could even read it thinking, no, wait, Catiline, is he saying Catiline is the most honorable one? Because most of the book, he's critical of Catiline, but then at the end, he gives Catiline like the apex kind of Roman death, like the most honorable kind of death a Roman patrician would want to have. His sword is out, his shield is broken, he's faced towards the enemy, all kinds of dead around him. It would be like the equivalent of like an American dying draped in the American flag with clutching the Constitution and a piece of the Liberty Bell or something like that, right? It would be like, you can't get more American than that. Well, you can't get more Roman than how Catiline died. So is he saying that Catiline is the hero? And it's interesting seeing these different perspectives. However, the problem is not that he helps us see different perspectives, but that he doesn't bring them back together. He leaves us with fragmentation. He leaves us with confusion, right? And that is consistent with his view that time is breaking us apart, fragmenting our vision, which is why I suggest perhaps Catiline is the first, Sallust is perhaps the first postmodern historian. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But interesting theory, perhaps. Okay. Now, a better example of this time as bringing decay, like the past is better, our current day is not as good, is what you see in a lot of medieval historians. Medieval historians tended to believe that they were standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Descendants from people that lived at a better time, and we're just trying to do the best we can. So to do this, they tried to synthesize as much as they could from the past and believe as much as they possibly could about the authorities they encountered. Sometimes this led to, them bending over backwards and doing, like playing Twister or something like that to try and make everything work. And sometimes they push this too far. But that's why they're doing it. They're trying to establish a kind of cohesive narrative about themselves. And one interesting example of this is how they interpreted Rome. So there is this, it's not really part of a history book, but this story of this vision of Octavian Augustus. How are we to interpret Rome? Yes, obviously Rome, there was persecution of Christians. Obviously Rome, there was some decadence. But Rome itself, Rome in its, we might say, essence, for the medievals would have to be good, right? Because it came before. And how can we attain to the glory that was Rome? We can't, because time is decaying. So they come up with this idea, and they did this a lot, of this, of prominent Romans. Now, if you're thinking of the essence of Rome, Octavian, or the Emperor Augustus, right, the first emperor of Rome, would surely have to be right up there. So they tell this story of Octavian. Well, I'll just read it real quick. And while Octavian listened to the Sibyl, heaven opened and a great brightness shone on him. And he saw in heaven a virgin exceedingly fair holding a man-child in her arms. Octavian marveled greatly at this, and he heard a voice from heaven saying, "This is the virgin that shall conceive of the Savior of the world." And again he heard another voice saying, "This is the altar of the Son of God." The emperor straightway fell to the ground and worshipped the Christ who should come. The vision took place in the chamber of Octavian, where the church of Santa Maria in, Capitolio, and where the friars minor are now. Another day, when the people had decreed to call Octavian Lord, he immediately stopped them with his gesture and his glance. He did not allow himself to be called Lord, even by his son, saying, "Mortal I am, and you will not call me Lord." Now, I wish this was true. I really don't think it is. I really don't think so. But, okay, look, Could it be true? Yes. I doubt it. But anyway, whether true or not, it's an example of how the medievals tried to think about the past and tried to incorporate and integrate the past into their own lives. Okay. So we've got time brings us up, we've got time brings us down. I should say quick conclusion. So there's a good use of the method, right? Humility and charity. There's a bad use of the method, which is loss of perspectival unity, overemphasis on fragmentation and decay. If you want to show different perspectives, that can be very helpful. Bring them back together again. Bring them back together again. Okay. Like, are any of you, I was having this argument with a music guy, I don't know, Jacob, Jacob. All right, so you know how some modern music, will leave it on, won't resolve it at the end and kind of leave it. Is that wrong?
Is it wrong?
Yes.
Morally?
Yes.
I'm not ready to say yes. But
I am.
It's a big statement.
It is a big statement. I know. I'm partially joking, yes.
Also, there's a preconception in your question that not all music is resolvable, if you know what I mean. Like that, there's a harmonic system that your question comes from.
Yeah.
That didn't exist until 16th century.
Yeah. See, I should never have asked an expert. Now I'm shaking. I wish I could have stayed secure. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing, right? To think about whether or not that's okay or whether or not that can be helpful. Okay. All right. There's another view. Time as a cycle or a circle that returns us to the beginning. Time as a circle. This is a very prominent, we're used to thinking of time linearly, but in the ancient world, medieval world, pre-modern world, tended to think of time probably more circular than linear. So you see a lot of historians write with this in view. This is an Egyptian burial grave. The Egyptians, they did mummies, right? Well, yes, they did. But mummies were probably reserved for people with wealth and status. Most other people were buried like this, in the fetal position. In the fetal position, this idea, right, that death was returning you to where you originated, right? Death as a kind of birth. So this completion of a cycle, right? So this view very prevalent in the ancient world, and many historians write with this in view. This idea that time, right, brings us back around to where we start. Time doesn't allow us to progress or decay, but time kind of brings us, time completes a cycle. Machiavelli wrote like this. Polybius wrote like this. Plato certainly wrote like this. Plato has this idea of political cycles where you start with, shall we say, hypothetically, really no laws at all, where people just know each other and trust each other, but then eventually you get to something like a timocracy, which is like an honor-based society. Think like the Iliad, right? An honor-based society, but which then those people with a lot of status get money, and then it becomes a kind of oligarchy, and then it becomes a democracy, and then eventually becomes a tyranny, and then that breaks everything down and the cycle starts all over again, right? Oswald Spengler, I think, seemed to kind of write like this. These historians believe that this cycle is a kind of inevitable thing. Maybe you can extend parts of the cycle. Maybe you can decide to live a healthy life. Cut out sugar, exercise. But maybe you can delay the end. But the end is coming, right? So maybe, like Machiavelli when he writes, he doesn't deny that eventually everything's going to kind of come to an end and come full circle. But he hopes to extend the good parts and minimize the bad parts. but you can't avoid them. Historians in this vein don't think that whatever's coming, you can't avoid it. You can postpone it, but you can't avoid it. That cycle, it's going to bring you around whether you wanted to or not. Now, one of my favorite historians, probably the historian I've learned the most from, is a British guy named A.J. Toynbee. He was a rebel against the British professional school, and he was heavily influenced by Spengler and Polybius and Plato and others. Now, he had an interesting idea. He thought that, yes, civilizations go in this cycle, but he did hold out hope that it was possible to break the cycle. He just didn't think that it happened very often at all. But he thought, no, it is possible. He did not like the idea of kind of determinism, and he held out hope that cycles could be broken within civilizations. But he's certainly heavily influenced by this cycle school. But he puts a twist on it. So for him, right, for Toynbee, time has a heavy influence on us, but it is not our master, so to speak, right? Man can have a kind of dominion over time, although time will really kind of railroad us into certain choices, and we're going to have to exercise a great deal of wisdom and foresight to avoid this kind of downward spiral of decay and fragmentation. But he thought it could be done. It could be done. Now, time as a vehicle for God's intervention. Some early medieval historians definitely fit, I think, into this frame. Time is basically a line, and things happen, but occasionally, and here I was thinking of like bam, like this big explosion, like from above you get these darts, and kaboom, God reveals his presence. Usually this happens with acts of justice. I'm going to skip the Henry of Huntingdon one. It's a good example. I'm going to go to probably the medieval historian that I've had the most fun reading. He's not the most profound, but is a guy named Abbot Suger, who wrote a book called The Deeds of Louis the Fat. It's about the king, Louis the Fat, and various things that happened in his reign. But he's at his best when talking about these moments of intervention. I'll just read real quick. So this people, there was this castle upon this high kind of cliff, easily defensible, and these really bad guys were invited over to this castle, but they murdered the husband and wife just in cold blood because they wanted to take possession of this castle. Really bad guys. Here comes Louis to save the day. What happened? Louis attacked them at sword point and piously cut down those impious traitors, mutilating some, disemboweling others painfully, and tortured them with every kind of cruelty, thinking themselves too kind. There can be no doubt that the hand of God exacted this swift vengeance. Men were thrown out of the windows, dead or alive, bristling with innumerable arrows like hedgehogs, that is, the bad guys. They waved about in the air on the points of lances, as if the very earth had rejected them. For the unparalleled deed of William, that is the bad guy, they discovered a rare vengeance. For he who in life had been heartless had his own heart cut clean, right out of his body. When they had taken it from his entrails, all swollen with fraud and iniquity, they put it on a stake and set it up for many days in a fixed place to demonstrate the punishment for crime. Such confident energy, and it's so fun. And I'll read one more. When those stiff-necked legates, this is about the investiture controversy. Some of you might know something about that. I personally don't know much about it, but they gnashed their teeth when the stiff-necked legates of the emperor, that is, the emperor wanted to appoint bishops himself. The church said, no, we appoint our own bishops. They gnashed their teeth violently, as Germans are wont to do, and went on a rampage. Before the Lord Pope had even put aside his episcopal vestments, the mad Germans invented a pretext for a quarrel, gnashed their teeth in fury, and raged out of control. The Germans, going beyond the limits of insanity, saw fit to lay their wicked hands on the Lord Pope himself. Basically, they kidnap a bunch of bishops and say, we won't let them go until you do what we say. But the Lord Jesus Christ, Redeemer and Defender of his church, did not allow her to be trampled underfoot any longer, nor did he permit the emperor to go unpunished. For many took up the cause of the storm-tossed church. With the help of the Lord, designate Louis, later known as Louis the Fat. He just kind of throws that in there for fun. The French church came together in a well-attended council and bound the tyrannical emperor with anathemas, running him through with the sword of the blessed St. Peter. Just marvelous confidence and energy that you see in a lot of early medieval historians. Time as a vehicle for God's intervention. It's a lot of fun, maybe not deep and profound, but a lot of fun. The apex kind of historian is the historian who can can see time liturgically. Now, what is liturgical time? I'm not going to say very much about it at all. I'm not the one to say anything about it. But we get hints of it, right? In the liturgy, we know that sometimes, right? So on Pascha, we don't say, way back when Jesus rose from the dead, way back when Jesus was crucified. We say, today. Today Christ is risen from the dead. Today Christ is crucified, right? In the liturgy, we are caught up, right? And participating in the event, but it's still today, but it's also then, and it's also someplace beyond today and then, right? Again, I'm not going to say much about that, but this is what we experience in the liturgy, the historian and liturgical time. Is it possible, right, for an historian to, they may not even be a Christian, right, but can they take time and compress it? Can they see it not so much linear or not so much circular, but can they see time kind of like as a tesseract, right? Can it be joined together? Can we have a real and immediate connection to what happened in the past? Historians of liturgical time, right? They unite heaven and earth, spirit and matter, universals and particulars, right? A historian who is thinking, consciously or no, about liturgical time will be able to unite particulars and ideas across time and space. So it's as if you and the Babylonians or you in World War II are just neck and neck. You're right next to each other. You could reach out and touch it. These historians, right, stands against ideas of like mankind swallowed by forces or abstractions, like Karl Marx, right? Or perhaps even Adam Smith, right? We're swallowed up by these forces we can't quite understand or see or comprehend. The historian of liturgical time will stand against the idea of mankind swallowed by, shall we say, particulars or the environment, like a historian like Fernand Braudel or perhaps like Jared Diamond, who might see everything is guns, germs, and steel, right? Everything is just matter, or everything is just ideas. No, right? The historian of liturgical time will put man in his proper place within time and will unite beginning and ends. Will compress time, not just scrunch it, but unite it, right? Bend it around and connect it. So that when you're reading a history book, right, or when you feel this kind of connection in a similar, perhaps not very similar way, but perhaps in a slightly similar way, the way we might feel that connection to the crucifixion on Good Friday. So, a minor example of this, Polybius, the Roman or the Greek, he wrote about the Roman Empire, Polybius, or the Roman Republic, and the Carthaginian Civil War. Polybius is great. He writes, number 4, he writes about the, well, I'll just tell you what he does, real quick. He talks about the origins of Carthage, 800 BC, and Carthage just has this little plot of land, and so naturally they're going to be seafaring folk. And what does this do to Carthaginian society? Well, merchants tend to be primary, and they're a money-oriented society and so forth. And what does this mean for the military? Well, this means that they're not going to have a citizen militia like Rome, because everybody's kind of out and scattered. So they're going to have a mercenary army. Well, what does that mean? Well, what happens if you pay mercenaries, or you have mercenaries fight for you, but then you can't pay them, right? Well, you thought you could, but you can't. But then now they're all in your city. Tens of thousands of soldiers who you owe money to and you can't pay. Well, then you have a civil war, right? But what is great about Polybius is how he unites Carthage's mythological origins to what happened in that civil war. And so it's as if, like, you can reach back 600 years and see the connection immediately. A more major example, Toynbee, my guy Toynbee, on determinism, truancy. So, the idea of determinism. What is great about Toynbee, I think, is how he unites certain elements, certain things that don't appear to be similar at all, and shows their connection. So, he'll talk about Babylonian astrology, Calvinist theology, certain kinds of free market economic ideas, and say they're really kind of one and the same thing. So you look at Babylonian astrology and you think, that's not me, that's weird, that's in the ancient world, that has nothing to do with me whatsoever. But then you say, oh, wait a second, when we just say, well, the market dictates, well, the market dictates, well, the market dictates, and we have no control over that, and we're just supposed to submit to it, Toynbee says that's kind of really one and the same thing. Civilizations are doing very similar things 3,000 years apart. Even though they don't look the same, they are quite similar. So, for example, he also talks about truancy and abandonment. So he links Mark Antony, who was this very hedonistic sort of guy at the end of the Roman Republic, and Diogenes the Cynic, this kind of detached philosopher guy in the decay of Rome and the decay of Greece post-Peloponnesian War, and says, that's really the same thing. It's really the same thing. And if you see that, your civilization is in trouble because it's in this kind of downward sort of spiral. A historian who can do that, in my view, is an historian of liturgical time, bringing unity and a kind of immediacy to our experience. The apex example, the best example I've read, the best historian who uses the liturgical time method is St. Augustine in the City of God. I have not read the whole City of God. I have read the first 10-ish books where St. Augustine does a kind of spiritual analysis of the history of Rome. It helps to know something about Roman history to understand what he's talking about, and I don't understand enough to really get what St. Augustine's talking about fully. But I've called a couple of examples here from St. Augustine's City of God. Now, those of you might know, some of you may know that Rome saw its origins in Troy, right? Aeneas, a famous Trojan, comes over. That's what the Aeneid is about. Aeneas ends up eventually founding the people that become Romans later on. So St. Augustine writes, if then Virgil says that the gods were such as these, that is, the Trojan gods, and were conquered, and that when conquered they could not escape except under the protection of a man, what a madness is it to suppose that Rome had been wisely entrusted to these guardians and could not have been taken unless it had lost them? Indeed, to worship conquered gods as protectors and champions, what is this but to worship not good divinities, but evil omens? Would it not be wiser to believe, not that Rome would never have fallen into so great a calamity had they not first perished, but rather that they would have perished long since had not Rome preserved them as long as she could? For who does not see, when he thinks of it, what a foolish assumption it is that they could not be vanquished under vanquished defenders, and that they only perished because they had lost their guardian gods, when indeed the only cause of their perishing was that they chose for their protectors gods condemned to perish? I should say St. Augustine wrote the City of God as a kind of defense against the accusations that Christians were responsible for the fall of Rome. And St. Augustine is doing something on a much grander scale, like what Polybius was doing with the Carthaginian Civil War. No, like, from the very beginning, this is what you would have expected. And I'll read another example. But I wonder very much that while the Romans assigned to separate gods as single things, and well nigh all movements of the mind, that while they invoke the goddess, Latin scholars here, Agnoria, who should excite to action, and the goddess Stimula, who should excite to unusual action, the goddess Strenua, who should make them strenuous, even the goddess Mercia, whom Pomponius says would make them merced, that is, too slothful and inactive, and that while they offered to all these solemn and public worship, they should yet have been unwilling to give public acknowledgement to her, whom they named Quies, because she makes men quiet, but built her temple outside the Colline Gate. Whether this was a symptom of an unquiet mind, or rather was it thus intimated that he who preserved in worshiping that crowd, not of gods but demons, could not dwell with quiet, to which the true physician calls, saying, "Learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls." Right? Like Rome, like you set this course for yourself way back when, and you can see your choices, shall we say, your destiny written in your choices from way back when, right? This idea of compressing and unifying Rome's experience, that's what a historian should hopefully really be doing, unifying time and space, not only just for a civilization, but for an individual as well. So conclusions. I would say this, and then glad to take any comments or questions. Number one, be aware of how you process your own memory. This is a choice with theological implications, right? You can't necessarily control what happens to you. You cannot maybe necessarily even control perhaps what memories you have. You do have control of how you process that memory and what significance you give to that memory. Number two, try and stretch, shall we say, liturgical kingdom time over how you process your experiences. And number three, disputes over what happened. One historian says this, one historian says that, another historian says this. How do you tell what is, quote, true? I don't know. But my suggestion here is maybe the best way to resolve those disputes, the best way for you to pick, without picking randomly, is maybe to take a look at their method. What do they think time is about? How do they perceive their connection to time? What effect does time have on them? And what effect does he think that time has on us? The better the answer to that question might lead to a better answer about particular conclusions. So maybe that might help you think about history books or historians, or even deciding about current, disputes about the meaning of events currently, right? So, those are my thoughts. I hope they're helpful. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Liz?
So I find this really interesting, just in the overall debate within Orthodoxy, like East versus West, because you have people, especially there's this viral post on Orthodox Trust right now, and so many Eastern people are commenting, and you have people either that these lay historians, their arguments are always pointing back, well, this bishop said this, or this patriarch said this, right? They're not tying it to the whole picture.
Right, yes.
And it's okay, do you not know history? Because then this bishop or this patriarch says something that's completely contradictory, right? They're just looking at a series of an edict or a letter or something.
Right, a kind of thin line of, a thin thread, yeah.
And then there are the people in Orthodoxy who are Western civilization is in decline. Therefore, the only thing that can save us is Eastern Orthodoxy. The whole civilization, we're just going downhill.
Right.
We need Eastern Orthodoxy. We're trying,
And nothing, we're going downhill and there's nothing to be done about it.
Right. Where I feel we are looking more in this time and space, but when we interact with these Eastern Orthodox who are very stuck in there, they're just coming from different historical methodologies. Right?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
It's really hard to even discuss with them because we are just viewing the historical context of the church in a completely different way.
Yeah, you know, I hadn't thought about that, but I think yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. How people perceive, well, some people too, I do think you have to be careful about thinking about ideas too much. I think you have to be careful about being like ideologically captured by a concept rather than, we might say, real lived life. And it's easy to really play fast and loose with concepts. Yeah, great, thank you. Anybody else? Brian?
Do you think that these different frameworks for telling historical narratives are mutually exclusive from each other, or could you tell a narrative that overlays several of them at the same time, depending on which aspects of that story you're attending?
I would say yes, and you know, right. Very few of these historians might be only this one particular thing. But I think I think the quote liturgical time historian kind of captures time as a line, time as a circle. I don't know, to my mind, I think that I don't fully understand this method. I feel like I hope I can perhaps sense it more than I can explain it. But that method, maybe that method could capture all the best of all possible worlds. Maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't quite know what to think, but I think that because I think you're right that like within that liturgical understanding, you could trace certain improvements in some areas, declines in others, maybe flat lines in others.
Right.
Interventions in others.
Yes.
So I'm trying to sort of work through my own mind. And I think it could be that, obviously the reality of what's unfolding in history is incredible. Like there's a lot happening.
Oh, yes.
And like which facts you zoom in on.
Right.
Things you try to causally relate to each other in the sense of like these things have some kind of explanatory relationship, right? There's an ocean of things you could try to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think my sense is depending on which of those you care about, they get integrated into that bigger story in a different way.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sometimes through the sort of liturgical meaning that they have. Other times it could be, we're worse in this aspect than we were.
Right, but better here. Yes, right. You know, I think that's true.
And the challenging thing I think is then how do you then tell it as a unified story when there's so much going on? It's not just random facts. It's very hard to tell that story in an age of fragmentation. We obviously live in a fragmented age. It's very hard to tell that story, to have a sense of it, which is why I think it requires deep, not just deep knowledge, but deep spiritual insight, which I do not possess, which I don't possess. So I don't know, but like St. Augustine did possess it. St. Augustine did. It takes, I think, almost something like a, quote, kind of revelation, I think, to really be able to bring these things together. And if you can't bring them together, be very careful about latching on to a particular part. I guess that would be my advice. Yeah. Chris.
I mean, with that, like, when you teach your students, to engage with history in the 21st century, like vision shots, like you take a bunch of sources from the past, and we're supposed to be able to make the science, and we're going to churn out an objective story here, but with taking, in some periods of history, there's so many sources you can focus on,
Right.
so many details of the story you can focus on. And you're talking about historians that leave you kind of what does any of this mean? Now, when you teach your students, middle school, and I know you deal with adolescent kids, it can be pretty I don't want to listen to this. Do you teach it with and at the end you say, and this means,
Right. Yeah.
preaching, or are you trying to, create that narrative in a way
Yeah.
that like exposes what you see it as meaning
Yeah.
without the
Yeah.
confrontation?
Briefly, I'd say I try and do a little of both. I try and show them how to construct it, and then sometimes I leave something hanging and try and let them piece it together themselves. But I try and, when they get older, like when they're juniors and seniors, I try and expose them to the fact that this historian is writing with a point of view. To get them away from, like, the kind of factual objectivity idea of historian, right? Whereas really, what history is really kind of about is about a world, a perspective, a worldview. But that's tricky to kind of get them to make that transition.
To what history is.
What's the last thing you said?
To get them to understand what.
Right.
What it could be and all.
Yeah, no, it is. It's tricky. Of course, because it's hard to explain. I don't fully know how to explain it myself. But,
I was just, real quick, I was thinking of journalism as well. There's this myth that journalism has always been this sort of objective.
right,
And that's something from the early 20th century.
right, yeah, as newspapers become big, sure,
We had this little window that was
yes,
what journalism was, but it hasn't always been there.
sure, no question,
Certainly not
right,
So it's like, it's kind of science, but still, it's like this myth that journalism at its precept was always supposed to be objective, and it really wasn't.
yeah, right. Well, I did grow up in an era where you had an agreed upon unifying authorities, unifying cult. You would listen to Tom Brokaw or Dan Rather, and they might vary a little bit, but they're going to say basically the same thing, and then there you go. That's what it is. You do need someone to craft a narrative. Without it, it's interesting. My student, even in the last 5 years, even the last 3, my students, the older students, there is no narrative anymore. The only thing there is this guy on YouTube or that guy on YouTube or that guy on YouTube. There is no authority anymore. And if someone is an authority, he won't be one for very long. Give them 2-3 months and they're on to the next. So this is definitely an age where there is no Tom Brokaw or Walter Cronkite anymore. So it's an age of tremendous opportunity. If there is someone, maybe in 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, who with great spiritual, maybe there could be another St. Augustine that could come out of this, another city of God that could come out of this period. It's open, right? It's open for interpretation. I want to make sure if you've got to go, you got to go. We're a little past time. But if anybody wants to stay, linger, has a question, thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you.